Okay, welcome to this week's episode of KUDEN. Uh, Most of you know who I am. Dai-Shihan Miller here from Warrior Concepts. So I'm flying solo tonight. James Sensei Alexander is normally my wingman, my producer. He runs everything in the background. I got a message about, 30, 45 minutes ago that he was on his way to get a stomach scan. So he thinks it's just a stomach virus that's lingering, but the doctors want to be sure. So anyway, hoping that he's okay, and well, we'll find out. So I'm sure he'll let me know as soon as he does. Anyway, so what that means is I'll be back and forth between hosting and doing what James normally does, right? So let's just go ahead and jump into these or into this episode. And yeah, so all right, so tonight I want to ask you a question, right? What happens when the very thing that once kept warriors alive stops fitting the world we live in? Right? Now, the Japanese have a very unique way of handling that kind of thing, regardless of whether it's a warrior thing or just social, cultural, that kind of thing. But here we are, right? In this martial life mastery, really hard to define in one phrase, unless we just strip a bunch of it away, right? But if you've ever felt that pull between what's traditional and what's practical, right? Between what's sacred and what's useful, then I invite you to stay with me through this episode, because we're going to peel back the layers on something that's been quietly, we'll call it quietly simmering in our art for years, right? You've probably noticed it if you've been around for a while. Some people trying to create their own modern ninjutsu, while others guard the past so tightly that nothing new can breathe. But what if the real answer isn't on either extreme, right? What if the art itself has always contained the key to its own evolution? And what if we've had it since at least when I got involved in late 1980, early 1981? It's a long time ago. But what if it's always been there and we've just forgotten how to read it? So in a few minutes, we're going to travel from the battlefields of Sengoku, right, the Sengoku Jidai Warring States period in Japan, to literally the mind games of modern life, right? If you've been paying attention, you know what the hell I'm talking about, right? And what I want to do during this episode is show you what our kamae, our kata, and our mindset really meant and still mean today. Right? And then before we close, I want to share a glimpse at something new, kind of, right? Kind of, right? What I want to do is kind of share a glimpse of perhaps a way of carrying these teachings forward that might finally explain what you've been feeling all along. All right. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started.
So, the big question is this: how are self-defense and success-minded people like us, concerned citizens worried about protecting ourselves, our loved ones, and the things we care about from the monsters we know exist in the world? How do we train in a way that gives us the skills, knowledge, and understanding we need without becoming paranoid fighters or killers ourselves, and yet still allows us to be the hero protector the world needs us to be? That's the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Jeffrey Miller, and welcome to KUDEN Radio. Real training for real people in a real world.
All right. Like I said, if you caught the early part before the intro ran. Sensei Alexander, he should be there by now. Was either going to the hospital or someplace to get a stomach scan. So hopefully he's okay. Hopefully it really is like, I don't know, stomach virus bug kind of pain he's been experiencing, but doctors want to make sure that that's all it is. So anyway, what that means is I'm flying solo, and so if there's little glitches here or there, it's because I'm trying to be host and my own producer at the same time, which means I've got to jump around in the background of things to do what Sensei Alexander normally does. All right, so let's do this. Before we jump into the episode, let's do what we always do, right? Let's see who's already on board. For those of you that are on the live side of things, of course, for those of you that are listening through Spotify or Apple Podcast or iHeartRadio, the literally dozens, if not over 100 or more podcast directories that we're on. So if you're on, obviously, it's one of the other reasons for hopefully, right, jumping on live so that we can engage back and forth and discuss some of these things and whatnot. But of course, if you're on the podcast things, or you're catching the recording on YouTube or even on Facebook, Instagram, those kind of things, I try to check as much as possible. We're literally all over the place, so it's physically impossible to do that, but I do my best. So you always leave comments, those kind of things, right? As long as they're nice, I'll reply. I try to reply to all of them. For those who are throwing flaming comments around, I don't reply to those because I don't have meaningful intellectual conversations with people who act like children. So that being said, let me just see. How's my chat function? There we go. All right. So who's on? Let's see. Jared's here. Kyle Von Blon is here. Mari's here. All right. So yeah, awesome. All right. I'm sure other folks will be trickling in. Otherwise, maybe this will be one of those not boring episodes. It'll be one of those things where just the title, right, throws people off, because I've been doing some research here lately, and I discovered that almost 90%, I think the number I had, ChatGPT and a couple of other AI that can literally scrub the internet across a bunch of places and whatnot and find who's doing what. And I think the number that I got back was like 88% of people teaching Ninjutsu, Bujinkan, Budo Taijutsu, whatever, right, are teaching the same techniques or variations or whatever, right? It's not that I don't teach those things, but there's a small handful of us. What does that make it? 12% maybe. That's covering the principles, concepts, strategies, tactics, and whatnot in any kind of meaningful way. And then the number of us, or the percentage of us that are covering the life mastery stuff, the lessons that Hakumatsu Sensei, Hatsumi Sensei have passed along for making it more applicable to our day-to-day lives. I don't know if anybody's noticed or not, but we're not in ancient Japan as much as the dreamers and fantasy guys and stuff like that would wish for, right? I don't know that anybody would knowingly wish for that, right? I'm actually honoring one of my friends in the art. He and I are gonna have to like have a phone call or something and get caught up. He lives states away and whatever, but this is actually a T-shirt from his training group that he gifted me a long time ago. So it's the Bujinkan Yume Dojo. Yume, for those of you who know some of the techniques, or you're going through our curriculum in Mod 4, right, in our introductory wind module, we have a sacrifice technique, which is just another one of those variations of Mushadori, right? There's a technique called Yume Makura, right? Yume Makura, dream pillow, okay? It's a play on words because of what you're doing with your hand. And no, I'm sorry, it's Te Makura. I apologize. Te Makura, hand pillow. right? So you're taking this thing and then just dropping your body weight, slamming his face and whatnot into the ground. But Yume Makura, right? There's another kata out there, Yume Makura, dream pillow. But this idea of a dream, right? It could be translated or looked at as a goal or a vision for our future, something we're aiming for and whatnot. Some people aim backwards, and not that I haven't wondered occasionally, right? What it really was like, because nobody can tell me, right? It's there's history books and things, and I've like my history on the side of Mikyo, right, on our Tendai Mikyo side. There is the student of a student, right? So Saicho Dengyo Daishi founded Tendai, right, as this big university to encompass all of this stuff, including Mikyo. Dave says Teimakura is a great technique. Yeah, as long as you're not on the receiving end. But anyway, Enin, his name was Enin, right? I was lucky enough to find an English language translation of his diary that he wrote. There's a certain point in Japanese history when the founders of the different Mikyo schools, right, Shingon and Tendai, they passed away, and the two schools did completely opposite things, right? Shingon closed down. They didn't. I don't mean they closed their doors and went out of business, and not that kind of closing down. They shut themselves in, right? And then they spent a lot of time just focusing on what Kukai, right, Kobodaishi, brought back from China and refining this stuff and whatnot. Tendai opened up, right? And what they did was they sent other folks out and they explored more things. So a student, I can't remember if Enin was a student of Saicho or he was a student of a student. Yeah. So he went on a secondary pilgrimage back to China to get even more information and stuff like that, right? To get even more teachings and training and whatnot. There's, again, different approaches to things. Okay. But I think that's important where we're actually being very, very clear about what we're researching, right? Most people that fantasize about being samurai or whatever, they don't research it far enough. Even some of the books that I've read about the samurai, just shove everything into one basket under a specific premise, right? Like the bushi, right? The warrior class, because the term samurai meant something completely different during different era. Okay. Sometimes they were just, that was the title given to somebody who was like a local magistrate and they did admin duties. At other times, they were relegated to basically bodyguard duty, or like for family members, or they might have castle guard duty, right? So again, remember, there are these classes of, and things can be thrown into a lump. But if we don't follow it far enough, we can miss things, right? I'll give you more of a closer to home kind of actual research thing. Wow, I think it's actually 9 years now. First time going to Dublin, Ireland. I was my proposal to do a speech talk at a workplace violence in healthcare conference in Dublin. So of course I, submit this thing. It came in, called my wife, hey, guess what? right? This thing got approved and everything. And the first words out of my wife's mouth was, "There's no fucking way in hell you're going to Ireland without me." I mean, she's descended from Irish and Polish, and that's a match made in heaven. But anyway, so long story short, we end up in Dublin, and so we tacked a couple of days before and a day or so, something like that, after the conference to do some, do some sightseeing and checking out the place. And I had long prior to that met one of the guys in the Dublin area. I was teaching Bujin kind of stuff, so it gave us a chance to kind of connect. And actually, a couple of guys. One was military and is still doing a bunch of special operator stuff, as far as I know. The other one was in security. And so, anyway, got a chance to meet both of them. One much more often, the other one kind of hooked up for a Guinness and went from there. But in our search for things to do other than touring the Guinness factory, there just happened to be a fairly new Viking museum, because Dublin was founded by Vikings. So it was really great. It was like it was not, didn't have a lot of diorama kind of things like you might see in museums. These were like full size little snippets of what social life would have been like, or the inside of, maybe a royalties living quarters or throne room or something. But I, like a lot of people, have been to Renaissance fairs and have studied different parts of history and thought, man, that'd be cool. It'd be cool to go back and visit. Yeah, I don't think that way anymore. Okay? Because going to the Ren fair is not the same. just in case nobody's ever noticed. Because one of the sections in this Viking museum, these full-size diorama and whatnot, right? Very clearly pointed out that, piss pots were dumped out on the streets. And can you imagine an area that's civilization, right? That I'm sure they went nose blind to it, but just reeked of urine and shit, right? Not just animals, ours, right? There was no running water. There was no toiletries. There were no, even military style, latrine kind of setups where you're going to sprinkle lye or something like that on things to make sure that, they're not all screwed up. Hey, Jimmy, how you doing? So, but the other thing was they obviously archaeologically had, found a bunch of these things in the area, and, everybody carried a comb. Well, that's cool, Sensei. Yeah. Yeah. But they didn't carry a comb just to keep their hair looking nice. Right? Everybody had lice. So, wow, Dave. All right. So, it was to keep the lice at bay. Right. Remember, they also didn't have what we would think of as cologne or deodorant, antiperspirant, that kind of stuff, right? So now add BO to the smell of everything, right? Now they attempted to make things out of flowers and some alcohol and whatnot, right? But one of the reasons that royalty dressed in so many layers, or wealthy people dressed in so many layers, was it kept the stench as far down inside the layers as possible, so it didn't permeate out into the rest of the world for interactions and whatnot. So the reason I'm discussing this is because I've heard lots of people say things like, "I only want to do it the traditional way," and that, based on my research and certain things that were socially accepted in ancient Japan, I have to ask, just how traditional you want to get there, Bubba, right? Lots of things that most people that want to be warriors it would be a hard no, not just a no, I don't think so. I'll pass on that one, right? It'd be a hell no, right? And a bunch of other expletives. So we have to be careful, right? lots to learn, right? Lots to learn. But I want to really dive in and take a look at things from the perspective of both the Shuhari model and a difference in battlefields, right? Because when we're modernizing things, again, it's another one of those questions I have to ask. What is it somebody is doing? Because if they think that, the modern SWAT teams and special forces and whatnot, those are modern day ninja, no, they would still be government run military or police troops. It's not the same. Right? So how can we keep things the same? Okay. How can we honor the tradition, but not do what has happened to so many other martial arts where they got basically turned into museum pieces? Like nothing gets changed. Right. How do we still bring that power forward? So I guess the question to ask is there a difference between preserving something that is ancient and we're doing in the modern world? Is there something different between that and translating the science, translating what was created so that it's still applicable in today's world? Right. So we're going to cover everything from why people shouldn't be so in a hurry to modify their kamae or their kata or that kind of thing, all the way to uh, development of fighting, all the way to looking at the evolution, right, of this art, okay, and how that's its nature. Everything that's alive evolves, right? And how do we honor Hatsumi Sensei and Takamasa Sensei's lessons and lineage without shoving it in a bottle and corking it up, or bastardizing it and turning it into something that doesn't, something that's not really based on the original principles and concepts. Right? There's a little task, right? I think. All right, let's see who else is on. I see Dave Fletcher. Dave Fletcher signed in. Jimmy's on. Let's see. I don't see anybody else. So if you're on and you're hovering, go ahead and sign in so I knew that you're here. But I'm going to go ahead and keep on keeping on. All right, so just bring my notes up here so I can stay on track with my logic, or at least my logic from earlier when I put this together. All right, so again, this is episode 281, right? 19 more, across that 300 threshold. If nothing else, I'm persistent, so see if I can stay alive for all that. Okay, so again, if you're just joining us, welcome back to KUDEN, everyone. Dai-Shihan Miller here. So this episode touches a space where, let's say, loyalty and progress meet. Okay, across the martial arts world, and especially in Ninjutsu, right? There's this quiet tension. Sometimes it's not so quiet because some people cannot be quiet. It's kind of like I told people when I was a federal cop, right? You have the right to remain silent, but you lack the capacity. So keep on talking. So this tension, sometimes quiet, sometimes not, right? Looks like this. Some are modernizing, right? They're blending in whatever's popular right now. People are there's a very influential, or at least he was for quite a long time, Ninjutsu practitioner, used to be part of the Bujinkan and whatnot. Their footwork looks more boxing-like today than it did in the couple of decades when I was training under that instructor. And if I would have done with my feet what I'm now seeing as a reflection of that system, I'm not saying it doesn't work, okay? But I'd have never attained rank, okay? Or they're picking up a sense of like an MMA rhythm, right? Or whatever, right? Mixing in this or that, okay? Um, and we know, right? On the other extreme, there's other stuff going on where you don't touch it, you don't change it, right? And then there's name calling if somebody, you know, dares to adapt things or whatever, right? So again, these others, right? They're clinging to every detail of the old ways, right? As if freezing them in time will somehow keep them alive, right? So obviously, there's lots of adherence to both sides, right? But in my humble opinion, both extremes miss something really vital, really critical, right? And that's that true preservation doesn't mean keeping the art the same. It means keeping the art alive, right? We're going to come back to that word, alive, right? Or living art, right? Husband Sensei's used that a lot, right? We're going to come back to that because it's central to this discussion, okay? So let's start with something tangible, though, right? And we'll keep it simple. Right? Not that these things are simple by any means. I know lots of people think they look that way, but they're not, right? But we'll start with something that's a concept that everybody should know, right? And that's kamae, okay? So uh, the truth is that there's a lot of students that look at the classical postures and wonder why we don't square up like modern fighters, right? And God knows we hear enough from the Bushido guys and everybody else that this is bullshit. It would never work in a fight, right? People don't do it that way anymore. Get with the times, all kinds of shit, right? As to why this wouldn't work, right? But in either case, right, what they're looking at or what they see is a stance that looks defensive, maybe even passive, or it looks aggressive. But like again, nobody does it like that. Okay. Um, and I've beaten this to death, and hopefully at some point most people will get it that kamae are not stances. Right? Kamae are a holistic, in the most simplified ways, they're a they're a holistic body, mind, spirit, attitude. What we can say posture, but again, if I just say posture, now it sounds like a stance. But where a stance is something that's taken up because it's an official part of the style, a kamae, we're all of us, all the time, even when we're sleeping, right, are in a kamae. Now they may not all have cool names, right, like sleeping ninja no kamae or whatever, right? But by the time we see the body take up a posture, that's at the end of the chain. Okay. Kamae are born on the inside, in the head and the heart, and the body manifests that thing in the overt way, the omote, right? Later we can learn to conceal them, but kamae is like a tell, right? It expresses one's inner truth. Again, until we apply Kyujutsu Tenkan. But it's not the same, right? So again, these classical kamae, right, were born from a world where every confrontation, this is the important part, could involve a weapon. Talk about this here in just a bit. But if we think about this stuff, right, even predating the Sengoku era, the Sengoku Jedi Warring States period, everybody was armed, right? And so if a fight didn't start out, or a duel, or, well, battlefields are just go get them, right? If it didn't start out with a weapon coming to bear first, like long sword, short sword, tanto, who knows, jite, all kinds of things, right? In sash. Um, at any point in that scenario, either with the person that you're dealing with or one of his allies rushing in, a weapon can very, very quickly, right, come into play. Very different, right? Very different, right? Every line, every angle was designed around survival, right? Around minimizing target exposure, maximizing adaptability, right? Keeping the vital organs out of the line or off the line of attack, out of the line of danger, right? In a ring or in a dojo, you can face someone chest to chest, right? In a world of hidden blades, that's going to get you killed, right? Well, maybe not, Sensei. I'm pretty sure, since I've seen more than my fair share of anatomy books and know where all the vital organs are. Yeah, no, and even if that's not the case, the way a lot of people hold their hands and fists for fighting and whatnot, right? It doesn't take much for a knife to nick things that turn you into Spider-Man until you bleed out, right? So, but here's the thing, right? As the centuries rolled forward, right, from the Sengoku Jidai period, I'm going to say into the Edo period, right, or sometimes known as the Tokugawa period, right? That 100 years of relative enforced peace. I think it was called the Azaki Moyotomi. Do I even have that in my notes? Hold on a second. I hate butchering things like that. So, yeah, Azuchi Momoyama. There we go. Right, but it's not something that I tend to focus on a lot because it only lasted for 30 years. Okay, the Sengoku period, about 100 years. Right, the Edo period, a little over 100 years. Right, so was it even a little bit longer than that? 1603 to 1867, 1868, something like that, right? So more, right? Yeah. So 2.5 centuries. But again, we have early Edo, middle Edo, and all these periods have these different things. But anyway, as it rolled forward, right, what we end up seeing, because of conditions, right? Because of conditions, we end up seeing fighting changing. Okay. Either because of enforced laws, like during the Tokugawa era, the Edo period, or as the Edo period gave way to the Meiji Restoration, right, mid 1800s, where things became more Western and there were more imported kind of things. And so, again, that question I asked at the very beginning, right? What happens when something that had warrior purposes or very specific purposes back in the day finds itself in a world where there's a mismatch, there's a disconnect, right? The Japanese have an answer for that. They turn it into an art, right? Jutsu gave way to do, right? Karate jutsu, karate do. Aiki jutsu or aiki jutsu, aikido. All of those, right? And now it's a art form, but anything with a do ending really is focused more on a Zen kind of thing, where let's say a martial system that, as a jutsu, as a combat survival system, would have been focused on a fist making contact with or through or beyond the target it was going after. As soon as something becomes a do, it's not universal, but it's enough. Now the practitioner is focusing on the hand, on the movement of the hand or the foot that's delivering the strike or whatever, right? Because it's a moving meditation. I'm not saying those people can't fight. Of course they can fight, right? But there's a cognitive disconnect or dissonance between the movements and the mindset driving the movements, or where the mind is during the movement. Right? But what you can see is as weapons became illegal or became not as necessary, or they became ornamental, or just all these things just kept changing, right? What you see is things going from bladed, or like the kamae that we're used to, more forward, more forward, more forward, more forward, until finally you look at Japanese fighters, boxers, and even sumo. Even sumo, which is based on kumyuchi, fighting in armor. All the life-sustaining systems are pointing directly at the other person. And so, again, as the centuries progressed, right, moved forward, and weapons faded, fighters squared up. Contests replaced combat. Right? Sneeze here. I've been holding it. Okay. All right. I bet that was fancy looking on the screen. Anyway, so, but again, the shift changed more than posture. It changed the mindset, right? And that's the metaphor that we're going to carry through during this episode. Okay? So when you think about this evolution of things, right? I mean, we have lots of things in our own culture. Shit, I'm coming up on 63. I'll be 63 in January, right? I used to sit down and have conversations with my grandparents because I wanted to know. Like, I could read things in history books, but these people lived it, like the everyday things, right? And the changes that they saw over their lifetime, right? And now, shit, I have those memories, right? Rotary dial phones turning into push button phones, turning into cordless phones, turning into big old clunky freaking cell phones in a bag, but really expensive, and it's hard for it to be mobile other than leaving it in your damn car, right? Into whatever, right? Just But anyway, so let's get back to this before I digress too much, right? So think about this. In the Sengoku period, right, the Warring States period, every encounter probably was life or death. Okay. The warrior's body and its positioning and the reason that armor was developed the way it was, right? It was a shield, right? Just like all weapons, all ancient Japanese weapons, right? Sword, spear, whatever, right? The weapon is also the shield. So in lieu of having external weapons, our body has to be in that position, right? I need you to hold on for just a second. I'll be right back. All right. Sorry about that. Little family home issue. Nothing bad. Just needed to make sure that everything was copacetic. All right. So where the hell was I? All right. So again, the warrior's body is a shield, and not just the limbs, right? Not just the arms. Okay. So, but progressing into the Edo era, right? Peace meant tighter laws. I mean, everything was regulated. Tokugawa's regulated everything. The length of the hilt of your sword, how deeply you bowed, how deeply anybody had given class structures in life, all kinds of things, right? But fewer weapons, more etiquette, posture softened, right? By Meiji and beyond, dueling gave way to sport. Angles flattened, risk diminished. Not that you couldn't have your brains beaten out or whatever, right? But became more contest, right? Kumyuch, actual fighting in armor, turned into two guys that make me look tiny, right? Bouncing off of each other, as a contest, right? So, yeah, right? Fighting evolved. But again, my contention is not necessarily upward. Some sensei has spoken on this. All the master teachers have spoken on this, okay? It evolved for safety, not survival. Okay? Even the martial arts that, people can, they still honor today, right? Funakoshi and a bunch of these guys, right? The kind of punches that we do that don't just break bones, but displace them, right? Turned into these snapping punches, right? Snapping kicks and whatnot. That at best you were going to get a clean break. Right? Not that a bone wouldn't break, but again, it's injecting these safety things. Okay. And again, I'm not saying these guys can't fight. This is not about that. Okay. But the point here is that the same drift happens in training today, right? Some adapt for popularity, others cling to things for purity, right? But if we're not careful, we find ourselves on either side of this divide, either extreme, right? In either case, we risk losing sight of why these forms existed in the first place, why they were developed the way they were. Okay. And so, again, I'll get to this again, but this is why I don't let my students soften up on their kamae. It's not that we won't eventually get to everything comes from, returns to, or is actually encapsulated within Shizen no kamae or Shizen Tai, natural body. But in a survival situation, and most of you, a lot of you guys know this, right? You've been in the shit, right? Yeah, not with me, but you've had similar experiences. And this is why my contention has always been and will always be that it's much easier for us to learn and really become adept at these classical postures built from a mindset that not just strategic thinking, but from a concept or perspective of military science, right? Because if we fight as though a blade or any weapon could come into play at any moment, then we're already prepared for that. But if we've allowed, right, this softening, this shifting into a one-on-one kind of thing, what's this called in Japanese? Chikara kurabe, right? It's like a head-on brute force against brute force. Let's see what happens, contest kind of thing. Then if a weapon suddenly comes to bear, like all of our shit is just exposed. It's much easier for us to adapt to something that escalates than it is for someone whose mindset is all wrapped around fisticuffs or fist and feet, and then something that changes the range dynamic, changes the ease of kill uh, quotient, whatever you would call it, right? Um, it's much easier to adapt because you're already there. Okay, that's why you see people that like start getting into it with somebody, right? Bumping chest or getting ready to throw hands, and then the other person draws a weapon, and this person instantly, whoa, 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 right? Because they know instinctively, right? They know, right? Okay. But again, just some considerations, right? Right. Again, I'm my own uh, producer, so this is where I would ask James to kind of read off some things or whatever. But I'm gonna have to jump over here and see if anybody popped in any questions or comments. Let's see. Dave says the UFC championship fight on Saturday got a lesson in poor kamae and ended in a no contest for a nasty eye poke. Yeah, yeah. There was a. Here's a for instance, right? I've caught bits and pieces here or there. When I watch things like this, it's anthropological, right? I'm watching to see how other fight stylists fight. Okay, uh, I'm looking at size. I'm looking at the way they lead, because I want to be prepared moving forward. If I encounter somebody that moves that way, then I already have a sense, right? Because and it's not just about that person, and then I'm going to globally think this thing, right? Anybody that stands like that is going to no. That's a variable. That's a piece, right? But size, not just height, right? You ever notice that some of the best Taekwondo people are like toothpick thin and they've got long legs compared to the length of their torso? Okay. Just faster that way, right? They don't have to be tall like James Alexander, right? He was in Taekwondo for a long time. He's got legs for days. I mean, I spent a year in South Korea with the military. Everybody learns Taekwondo, but they all have basically the same build. And those who didn't do as well, right? So they get into fishing and whatever, like the interpreter at our military police station, one of them. Short guy, same height as most of them, but he was a little bit more stocky and he had long torso, short legs, right? These things matter, right? But build, mindset, all that kind of stuff, right? So I do it to explore. But the one I did watch from beginning to end was, some of you are going to laugh because the numbers are way up there, right? Okay, which number of UFC fight it is. Last one I watched seriously was number 3. Okay? And I wanted to do the whole head slap thing because one guy, he was an alternate, was a boxer. And I get it, right? I'm supposed to like take your fight style, try it against somebody else's. The marketing back in the day was, let's see who has the best style or the one that is more suitable to, right? And now it's not laid out that way. But either way, right? So this guy that's a boxer gets in the ring wearing boxing gloves. Partner was wearing those smaller, thinner, barely protected against his knuckles kind of thing. Yeah. He didn't last very long at all because he was not used to boxing against somebody who was going to slam him with bone structure and not 5 inches of cotton wrapped around his knuckles. Okay? Not saying that doesn't hurt. I've been hit by boxing gloves. It's not the same. Not by a long shot. Okay? There's somebody else. He won his fight. I think it was a Kempo guy. Went up against an American sumo. This guy was from Hawaii, lived in Japan for a while, and beat this sumo guy into the ground. But he was done. So he won his fight, but he shattered both forearms doing it because that's what he used to beat this guy into the ground. Just And by number 3, right, the whole pre-fight, pre-tournament kind of thing, all the not marketing, but all the pre-show blurbs and all that kind of stuff had like half these guys going off to a 6-week or 6-month jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu camp to compete with the Gracies, and they thought that was going to give them an edge, or at least neutralize their uh, their advantage when these guys started doing that shit when they were 5 years old. Instead of looking at what they do and then looking at my system and going, okay, strategically, if I were a general, how would I match this up? And I don't mean matching it up kick for kick, punch for punch. Where the weakness is, right? What does he need from me? So I need to be in a different position so he can't maximize on that, right? And what does he leave exposed when he attacks the way he attacks? That's strategic thinking. That's military minded. Not necessarily military like you're in the military, but it's combat minded, right? It's applying scientific principles to handling this. But either way, right? It's still a sport, still a contest, because there were, like back then there were only 3 things you couldn't do. You couldn't eye gouge, which Dave pointed out, right? Couldn't eye gouge, you couldn't bite, and you couldn't kick somebody in the groin. Okay? And you didn't get disqualified, right? It was just $1,000 fine, right? Out of a $25,000 purse. Shit, I stabbed, bitten the person, and kicked him in the groin, and said, "Give me my 22,000. I'm going home." Right? But anyway, but I don't get involved in those kind of things because I'm not willing to do that to somebody just to get money or a trophy. Anyway, anybody else pop anything in here? I don't think so, but I am going to keep moving. Again, get back to things. All right, so Dave, where'd you hide my notes? Oh, there we go. All right, so all right, so again, there was this transitionary period, right? But again, the movement was away from battlefield survival to contest fighting. Okay. Let's revisit something. All right. I've talked about this in other KUDEN. I've talked about it in Whiteboard Wednesdays. Those students that train with me full time regularly hear this all the time, right? This shuhari, this learning model. Right? It's an ancient Japanese learning model. Shuhari, right? It describes the stages of mastery. Okay. Shu, right? SHU, not the one for hand, not the lots of words in kanji for shu. This means to preserve, to copy. It implies to obey the forms, right? Shu itself means to preserve or copy, right? Ha means to break, but it implies exploration, right? To explore, to question, right? We apply what ifs, right? What if he's coming in with this angle of a punch instead of this straight on ski kind of thing, that kind of thing, right? What if the environment's different? What if the clothing are different? All that, okay? And then RI means to transcend, okay? But what's implied here is an internalization process, okay? And the ability to express the essence, the kotsu, freely, right? The Ri stage is in understanding the principles and concepts so well that you don't need the forms anymore, that you literally create new forms every time you move, right? So you're not just making shit up, but there is a creative process. The difference between the two, that's me since I discussed this over the years, right? Just like there's a difference between a henka and doing whatever the fuck you want, right? They're not the same, right? For a henka to be a henka, it has to be doing the same thing. The core technique is doing principle, concept, strategy, tactically, right? To be a henka, right? It's a variation of what, right? You don't have variations of nothing, right? Just like ninjutsu itself is a variation on conventional warrior skills, right? Um, but there's a huge difference between a true henka and just doing whatever. Nagata Sensei just recently, here in the last year or so, uh, during one of his trainings, said, just because you can win doing something, right? That doesn't mean that you're doing taijutsu, right? Don't confuse taijutsu and its principles with just fighting, right? I believe that everybody that comes to me can fight, okay? Maybe not scientifically, and to some degree, right? For some, it's verbal. For some, it's physical or whatever. They're scrappers, but it's not the science, right? But either way, right? So shoot, preserve, copy, right? To obey the forms, ha, right? To break, right? To explore, to question, that kind of thing. Re, transcend, internalize, get you know the principles and concepts so well that you don't need forms anymore, right? You can express the essence freely. So one of the 5 principles I just covered during our fall camp. Kotsu, right? The essential nature of the technique. What the hell is that technique doing? Or the kotsu of that particular move in that technique, right? We broke down Ichimonji no Kata as a way to win against somebody who's just like slinging insults, or you're wanting to argue, or that kind of thing, so people can understand kotsu, right? And what I basically was showing people how to do is use Ichimonji no Kata to win an argument without chopping the person in the neck, right? But the point here is that too much shu, right, and we become museum curators, right? Nothing's allowed to change, okay? Too much ha without ri, right? And we turn into inventors without lineage. Okay? The goal is to live where principle drives expression. That's what Hatsumi Sensei modeled when he said the Bujinkan is alive. It's not fixed. It's not trendy. Okay? It's alive through understanding. Right? I believe that's why he promoted so many people to Shidoshi, right? Way back, mid to late 80s, right? He set a goal one year that by the end of the year we'd have 300 Shidoshi. Oh, people were just like passing the fifth on test left and right. Of course, the test changed. And then when he had enough of those, then he went back to testing the way he had originally. Anyway, so things evolve, right? But it's the same reason that a lot of masters in the past have given multiple people soke-ship. Takamatsu Sensei did that, right? Multiple people soke-ship, multiple people Menkyo Kaiden or whatever. The hopes is that one or two, right, handful, get it and can pass it on correctly, right, to keep it alive. Okay. But let's dive into that word, okay, about the word alive. Okay. Being alive doesn't mean reinventing. It means understanding. Okay. Even for us. Okay. Even for us. Okay. People stagnate and become resentful and disheartened and all kinds of shit, right? As soon as they stop, one of two things happens. They either come to a point where they think they know everything, right? Or they stop challenging themselves. They stop moving with purpose, right? Things become stagnant. It can feel relaxed. It can feel whatever, but not only, and even if we don't recognize it from a personality level or a mental level, right, the body starts to crystallize on the inside. Arteries and veins lose elasticity, right? The organs don't. They you get this hardening, right? They become less efficient. You know? Interesting. So again, my contention is that classical kamae don't need modernization, right? I've seen people and what people have created by making modern ninjutsu. Um, sometimes, and some people are doing okay; they're getting it right. But what some people are doing is just substituting one thing for another, regardless of the principles and concepts. Because all they're doing is taking what it looks like and replacing it with something they can do or something they think fits the modern world, right? Like this postural change. And it's not ninjutsu anymore. Right? You call it whatever you want, but it completely misses the mark. Okay? So again, the big reason the classical kamae need modernization is they were engineered for adaptability from the start. Okay, they weren't designed for personal preference. They weren't designed from a style base. Right? I've talked about this in the past. The kamae are from any lineage. I had a student one time, very astute. Right, he's in law enforcement. He's applied this stuff not just on the street. He's applied it to get new job positions and whatnot. So he's used the Seishin Teki lessons and things like that to literally recreate different aspects of his life. So really cool stuff. But they they don't need you don't need to change something. What you might have to do is okay. So instead of having the argument that we should adapt this because people don't fight that way anymore, that old stuff, right? They fight this way. And so what we're going to do is just absentmindedly, like the people I've seen take up Ichimonji no kamae and then profess that they're too slow to deal with, a modern speed fighter. And so they start bouncing on their feet in Ichimonji. And then what they're really trying to do is combine it with some taekwondo kick or something dong sudo or Muay Thai or whatever. That just screams, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing, right? I want to be able to profess that I have a black belt in this art too, but I really don't get it. Anyway, so let me get off my little pedestal here. So each posture, right? Ichi no kamae, seigan, hira, doko, whatever. This is a technological solution to a tactical problem. Okay. The lineages, all these lineages, right? Hasumi Sensei has discussed this, right? Battles are battles of secrets, right? Every lineage has its approach, even different, let's say, koppo jutsu lineages, right? There was a good part of a year that I really dove into this idea of koppo jutsu, and not just this surface level, right? Like tracing Koto Ryu's koppo jutsu and Gikao Ryu's koppo jutsu, and realizing shit, they're not exactly the same. Koppo jutsu is not koppo jutsu, right? Or just recognizing, and this is where the rabbit hole started, that like the original koppo jutsu of Koto Ryu was not the way we do it in the Bujinkan. It's way closer to hardstyle karate, which, like, I had to remember back when I first started in this art, late 80, early 81, and hearing that koppo jutsu evolved into hardstyle karate. Koshi jutsu evolved into soft style karate. It's easy to parrot, but understanding it. And then for one of the camps, I decided to focus on Koto Ryu pre-Bujinkan influence. That was an eye opener. Okay. But again, these things, the kamae was at the end of the developmental chain. All the kamae have strategies, but they're also tactical bridges. Right? Tactics are things that we do to make the execution of our techniques easier. And the techniques are built from the principles and concepts, the strategies and whatnot that lineage uses as their way to solve this problem, to win this life or death thing. The trick was to use solid principles, which is why, they were similar across the board for a lot of these schools, but not the same. Because if you fight like everybody else, well, then everybody else knows how you fight because you're going to fight 90-95% just like them. They've already fought people who fight like them, which means they've experienced it. They know what they're looking at. They know what they're looking for, and they have solutions for it. Turns it into a fucking contest. Survival, ladies and gentlemen, is not a contest. As the Bible says, right? The word sin, right? It's an old archer's term. It means to miss your mark. The wages of sin are death. And that wasn't a religious thing. That was just borrowing from something that people have probably already heard. Okay? But the geometry of each of these kamae protects vital systems and channels and channels force efficiently, right? Effectively. Right? Without having to think about covering something or relying on a flinch response to somehow suddenly get something into place. A lot of guys, right? I'm sure some of you guys know people that either in your past, maybe, I don't know, so for a couple of you, I can see where it might have been a past version of you, where it was this tough guy thing, right? Willing to stand there, clench up the abs, take a shot, right? Because you get hit in a fight, man. You got to be able to take a hit. Yeah. Well, what if there's a fork or something else in his hand that's coming in, and that's all you know? That's your habit. That's your default. Well, Horatio, we knew him well, right? So we don't alter kamae to match today's trends. Right? We study the science and learn how to select the right posture for the particular fighter that is in front of us, for the attacker that's in front of us, but not just for them, for the environment, for the situation in its entirety. Right? Which one will allow for the execution of the technique easier? But see, the technique comes before the kamae I chose because there's a strategic outcome, right? If I'm a cop, I need this guy face down and in cuffs. If I'm me and I'm at home, I want this guy out the closest portal to the outside, door or window, as possible. And anything that does not steer him in that direction prolongs this damn thing and risks my life and the life of those I care about more than I care about everybody else, just being honest. Right. So, again, the form doesn't change. What changes? Our understanding, our comprehension. That's what changes. Once we understand that, it's really difficult to ignore the fact that the real weapon has never been the sword or the kamae or the joint lock or whatever, right? It's the mind. It's the mind that chooses and applies these things. It's very different. And that brings us to the next frontier, which is a different type of battlefield. There's a very different type of predominant battlefield in the 21st century here in the West from that which was predominant when this stuff was created. It's very different. Okay. Does that mean that, right, everything is different? No. All right. I mentioned some of this earlier. Just going to revisit again from a different direction. But before we do that, let me play Sensei Alexander thing here and pop over. Where the hell is my button? See where we are. So let's see. Oh, look, Victor signed in. Good evening, sir. How are you? Hopefully you're continuing to do well and um, look dapper in your Kwai Chang Kane persona. Anyway, all right. So I don't see anything new. So either I put people to sleep or, I don't know, you're tuning in. You're busy scribbling out notes. Okay. So here, the difference in the battlefield, right? The modern battlefield, right, can be seen as one just like stances evolved over time to go from survival to sport contest, right? No weapons, just fists, just brute force, right? Battlefield has changed too, from sword to speech. Right? And I know there are certain pockets in the world. There are certain pockets that pop up, like the different, mostly peaceful demonstrations that are going on. But for most of us, for most of our lives, today's battles are rarely physical. Could they be? Sure. Right. But just like in ancient Japan, where there was a highly regulated social construct that dictated what we say, how we carry ourselves, right? What's expected of us, right? Okay. Disrespect somebody in ancient Japan. If you didn't just get put in stocks and shit on in the public square, or jailed, just fucking kill you. Okay. We live in a world now where nobody's punished for what they say unless it's been deemed hate speech or terroristic threats, right? Somebody can manipulate you, gaslight you, call you all kinds of shit, right? Break your will, all kinds of stuff, right? Nothing. You punch that in the face to teach him a lesson that he sorely deserves. You're the one going to jail. It's a completely different world. Okay. In today's world, those battles, right? They're emotional, they're psychological, they're social, right? And they're fought with things like words, pressure, manipulation, distraction, right? I call this the heart-mind battlefield. Right? Again, at this past fall camp, we explored this directly through Ichimonji no Kata. Because I needed students to understand that, look, you can go to the dojo all the time. You can enjoy martial arts training. I enjoy martial arts training. Right? We all share in this. There's something wrong with us. Personality type. Or you have any friends or family members or whatever that just look at you like there's something wrong with you. You get together with other wingnuts. You throw each other around. You hit each other. What is wrong with you? And you just have to smile and just just you don't understand, right? Anyway, so what I did was I broke this thing down. So if you were there, I apologize for the review, but what we did was we broke it down and looked at it based on principles, okay, to get to the kotsu, 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 right? Not bone, not ego, right? Kotsu, essence, right? The essential nature. What is that thing doing strategically to control the scenario and win? Right? So if we think about Ichimonji no Kata, what are we doing, right? Well, there's a punch that comes in. We're doing uke nagash. We're breaking his balance, creating an opening for ourselves, and then we're moving in and doing a shito, right? Typically, omote shito to one side of the neck, but it could be ura shito to the other side. It could be hon shito straight to the freaking face, whatever, right? But typically, it's coming into this thing. But that's talking about moves. Any monkey could do that. What is Ichimonji doing? What's each move? What's the kotsu of each move? So if we could break this down into its principles, into its strategic military science based essence, then what we recognize is there's an attack coming at us. We move ourselves to a different position so it can't affect us. And we effectively neutralize the force of that incoming attack. We render it moot, right? It doesn't affect us, right? And then we create an opening, or we exploit a mistake that they've made or some kind of opening that they've had, right? That stalls their ability for at least a moment to keep going. And then, and actually, when we shifted, we are paying attention, right? We are discerning their strengths and their weaknesses. So that when we turn this around, we attack a weakness, could be more, but we attack a weakness in this case, right? That stops this thing dead bang. Okay? Because Ichimonji no Kata, it's not a basic technique. We give it to beginners, but that doesn't make it a beginner technique. Ichimonji no Kata is an ideal, right? This guy throws an attack. I neutralize this thing, break his balance, preferably in one move, enter in a way where if I'd done those other things correctly, he can't escape, he can't defend, he can't counter, he can't attack me in the process, right? And so I'm able to just take that in, finish this, and it's over, right? So if I can understand that I am moving my position offline, so whatever's throwing at me isn't going to hit. I'm not just trading shots, right? It's not going to hit because I'm standing there, block punch, block punch, block punch. Getting the hell out of the way, right? I'm repositioning myself to where I have a different vantage point, and it minimizes the effectiveness, right? But because I'm going to avoid, I can also watch how he attacks, watch what he does, identify strengths, identify weaknesses, and then when I decide it's time to move, or he presents me with an opening that I can make a little bit bigger, right? I can do something in a way that for just a brief microsecond, for a brief moment, he can't stop me from doing what I'm going to do. I'm going to target one of those weaknesses. I'm not going to target his strengths. I'm not going to target the maybe it is, maybe it isn't, right? I'm not going to be hitting things that, well, I can, hit him, but I'm going to have to hit him a couple of times to knock him down, or maybe this will work, maybe it won't. No. I'm going for something that I don't care how big he is. This is a done deal, right? So if I understand that, then Ichimonji no Kata becomes a model for any conflict. So if somebody's slinging insults, if somebody is, wanting to argue, throwing a whole bunch of shit at me, right? Mentally, emotionally, right? Kamae comes from the inside. I don't respond with anger with anger. I don't mudsling, right? Like most people argue, and then they want to apologize later. No. Right? So I mentally and emotionally position myself so that whatever they're throwing at me doesn't evoke a response. So I can be in observation mode. And then I can listen for truths, half-truths, right? Embellishments, those kind of things, right? And outright lies, right? They're just making shit up so they can win a fight. People do it all the time. Right? And then when they have to take a breath, or I say, no, my turn, right? I'm only attacking their weaknesses. Their biggest weaknesses are their lies. I attack those because they can't protect them. They can't justify them, reinforce them without making their position weaker. Okay. And if I've identified other ones that are ones that will actually psychologically and emotionally cause them to cave, maybe that'll be it. Or could be an emotional thing, right? Who knows? My sister's having a moment, and whoa, my turn. Okay. Now I could do the same thing that you're doing, but I love you too much to wreck our relationship. So I think we should take a little bit of time away from each other. 5 minutes, 5 days, 5 months, whatever it's going to take. But I'm not playing this game. Okay. So it doesn't have to be destructive, right? It can be compassionate, whatever. But that's Ichimonji no Kata, right? I evaded, I repositioned myself, not necessarily physically, mentally and emotionally, to neutralize the force of their attack. Okay. And then when it was time to go in, right, I did something that caused them to stall, or I waited until they needed to take a breath. They're stalled. And then I only attack. Right? If they're throwing truths at me, this is not the time to be going, yeah, but mentally, I can put that off to the side because that's true. I need to work on that. Embellishments, they're just making a mountain out of a molehill kind of thing. Not worth it, right? Lies, oh, dude, right? That's like exposing Uko. Right? Or if they've got other ones they brought with them, maybe what they're saying is just a bunch of, they're just jumping around all over the place. Yeah. So I can do the nice version, or if I'm okay with burning bridges with this person, I'll say things that'll make them never want to talk to me ever again. They can be pissed at me from a distance, but they're not going to want to get into another exchange again. Okay? That's Ichimonji no Kata. That's understanding the kata at a principle concept level. That's what he. Okay? So this is right, but this is what we have to worry about more than anything else these days. Okay. When I covered this, when students saw it that way, right, from this perspective, I could almost hear the click in the room. Okay. Because if the principles work against words, shit, they'll work against anything. That's the breakthrough. The attack changes, but the science behind the response does not. This is my issue with people who try to reinvent the wheel because we need to modernize things. I can't do much about anybody that just wants to get stuck in the mud because they're just regurgitating forms. It's not that they don't understand strategies and tactics, but as long as they're holding on to the forms, they can only go so far, right? But there's a huge difference between modernizing the art and translating that kotsu and those principles and concepts that underpin everything, and translating them for the modern world, for our Western experience. So nothing has to change except our understanding, our comprehension, our ability to apply the lessons without getting stuck or without throwing it all away and creating something that makes us feel all warm and fuzzy because look what I did. Right? So that's the bridge between the physical and the spiritual sides of our art. And that's exactly what the teachings that are in the Seishin Teki Kyoyo were meant to cultivate. Right? Training the body without the heart and mind is like sharpening a blade by dulling the wielder. You can have the sharpest knife in the world, but if you can't freaking use it, right? I'm going to sharpen my knife and hammer my hands at the same time. So a lot of you guys already know, I wrote that book, Ninja Seishin Teki Kyoyo, right? It was written for this reason. And while it contains the core elements that would have been there for the Togakure Ninja, right? There's obviously other things on top of it that other students have kind of explored and whatnot and gone into. It's, had a little push for it and whatnot. I'm going to call it relaunching it because I put it away for a while and I haven't talked about it other than like in passing. We're relaunching it I'm hoping it's this week. We've had some glitches in getting it converted over, but we've had just this huge drive or request for it to be in physical form, like a real book. And so that's the project we've been working on, so that it's instead of it being digital and then people have to take notes somewhere else and whatnot, it really is laid out with like assignment and project areas and whatnot to actually make it more than just a book, but it also allows you to work through things, right? So by turning it into a real book, not a real boy, but a real book, it's the Pinocchio book. No, um, then folks would be able to do that unless they have an issue with writing in books like I do, and they're going to take notes somewhere else anyway. So, but again, the book was written for this reason, right? To help modern practitioners train, not just to learn kata, but to train their perception, their emotional regulation, right? Their stress inoculation, right? Their intent with the same precision that they train their strikes and their throws and their cuts, and right, because in today's world, the first attack usually lands on the inside, right? Stress, head, heart, right? Like I said, gaslighting, manipulation, all kinds of shit, right? So, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our community moving forward? Right? So, we'll look at that next, because again, we really are talking about evolution. Okay? Uh, I think a lot of you already know by now, if you've been following along with anything, not just mine, but just out in the Bujinkan world in general. Hatsumi Sensei, a couple of months ago, wrote a letter to the Bujinkan in general. And in it, he said, at this point, he's just waiting to die. Um, but he's very clear about it, right? He understands the nature of things, the nature of life, right? Um, but he also said that he actually absolutely expects that the Bujinkan will die with him, and how that's also natural. But if we understand that the Bujinkan started out as the name for his dojo, grew into an organization to transmit this art to the world, right? Um, well, then it like any other body will pass, but that doesn't mean that the lessons have to go, right? And that we stop honoring Hatsumi Sensei or whatever. And a lot of people, because who knows, one person that I know was always in a high position within the Bujinkan, and then a bunch of these other ranks came along, and it just seemed like it was oversaturated. And in his words to me, right, what's the point? Which just spoke volumes about, like, he needed to be in this position, right? And because he didn't stand out, right? Um, Walked away from the Bujinkan, right? Create his own thing. And lots of people are doing that in some shape or form. I know people have done it a decade or two ago and whatever, right? Just doing their own thing. They didn't like the way things were going, so whatever, right? But I don't know that we need to walk away from anything. I think that as things evolve, right? We don't walk away from our genetics, our grandfather, great grandfather, all that kind of stuff, right? Still the same, right? But we can add to that body of knowledge, right? We can evolve. We can take some of the things that they passed along, or their work ethic, or things that just they're timeless, right? And apply it in today's world, even though today's world looks completely different, right? There are no Model Ts or Model As or horse-drawn buggies. I mean, well, there are in my area because the Amish, there's lots of Amish. But right, we can still honor things. We can still honor the teachings of Hatsumi Sensei and Takuma Sensei, whatever, um, even though it looks like, well, I mean, change will be change, right? But without walking away from things, right? A lot of people don't understand that two things can be true at the same time, right? So we can honor the tradition, and see, and at the same time, see that the change or the not new approach, but the approach, right? Or the way it's being translated is a natural next step, right? Just like for my Mikyo students, right? Hinayana was necessary for Mahayana to be created, right? And Mahayana doesn't ignore the Hinayana stuff, right? It just explains it in a different way so more and more people can understand those core lessons, right? Hinayana, small vehicle, is not an insult. It's called a small vehicle because so few people could follow the dogmatic rules to fully engage with that form of the training or the education. Mahayana, greater vehicle, doesn't mean it's better. Some people believe that to be so, but it just means that it's adjusted and it's evolved so that it can help more people, but ultimately everything still points back to those core lessons. Same thing with Mikyo, right? It's just the next natural stage that actually comes off the back of Mahayana, but is also an individual path like the Hinayana. So it's like a synthesis. It's the bridge that connects them both. So it's just very, very, very different, right? Hatsumi Sensei, right? Created an evolution from the things he got from Takamatsu Sensei, right? The thing that we know is the Bujinkan started out being known as Hatsumi-ha, right? It was Hatsumi's approach to all the stuff that he had learned, both from Takamatsu Sensei and from previous things. Okay, not the same. Okay, so again, it's misunderstanding always causes shit, right? Or conflict or aggravation or whatever, right? So anyway, let me just see if anything popped up there before we talk about I don't know, carrying the flame forward, so to speak. Okay. So too many buttons, not enough time. All right. I see the numbers growing and whatnot, but I don't see anything new in the way of questions or comments. So I'm going to assume, let's see, what's this? What's that? Ooh, new toys. No, I clicked on a chevron. Now I can't close it. Oh, wait, what is that? Nope, cannot. All right. So before I mess this up too badly, let me get back to my notes. All right. So, and you guys, you know, as long as you're being respectful about it, you can always post that, you know, sensei, you're full of shit or anything. All right. Well, almost anything. It's amazing how much like Teflon Dons, if you know the reference, the mafia reference, the untouchable leader, know-it-all, guy in charge, whatever. It's amazing how many people feel like that when they're at the other end of like, you know, the internet. I'm sure you guys have experienced this, right? People say on Facebook what they would not say to your face. Maybe I should stop mentioning Facebook because I feel like I finally like got a handle on that for communications and whatnot. And here now I'm told that's for old folks. Go figure. All right, so here's what we've done so far, right? We've traced our lineage in this episode, right? From battlefield to literally, right? Boardroom, workspace, home, whatever, right? From armor to awareness. Okay. We've seen what happens when people try to either rewrite the art or embalm it. You know what embalming is, right? But the true path, the one that our teachers lived, is to let the principles breathe through us. One of the first lessons I got related to this in the early 80s, based on these principles, based on how Hatsumi Sensei's teaching to Shidoshi Hayes, or whatever his title is these days, right? The most traditional thing that I could do as a ninja is not go running around in pantaloons, or the tied off hakama, right? Tabi, and carrying a sword slung across my back, right? Because that's not the world we live in. But this stuff is even more applicable today than it's ever been, if we understand how and why Ninjutsu came to be, right? So when we understand, the art evolves naturally, right? Whether we want it to or not. When we misunderstand, it fractures. So I've been teaching this translation approach for decades, okay? Ensuring the art works for today's threats without, we'll call it, without betraying yesterday's wisdom. Okay? And I think I'm pretty damn good at it, translating ancient Japanese. Now, again, not that I'm some kind of prodigy, right? Got it from Hatsumi Sensei, got it from other master teachers, whatever. But I'm not a soke. My job is not to preserve a lineage per se. My job is, and always has been, right, from the earliest points in my training, where the highest rank in the Budokan was fifth dan, Shidoshi, right? And Shidoshi were charged with one very important task, but they had a really big benefit / obligation. And maybe the obligation was on the other side, right? So the task, or the obligation, was to teach lower ranks what they needed to know to understand Hatsumi Sensei's movement and teachings and things like that, right? It was to build within them the proper foundation, okay, for understanding. And then the big benefit was, at that rank, they could establish their own network, their own organization, to carry the art forward. And the naturalness of it would be, like a reflection of this particular student. Then, of course, the more fifth downs we got, then sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th was, and so that was pushed farther back. And then after that, there were what I call the beyond mastery degrees, because I hate saying 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. I don't care what anybody else says. The Japanese started saying it because nobody would use the freaking correct terminology. So instead of saying Judan Chi-Menkyo, Judan Sui-Menkyo, whatever, people started using 11, which is completely contrary to the Japanese mindset and approach. 10th dan is return to zero. So if that's a return to zero, how in the flying flagada can you have 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15? But the Japanese did it as an expediency, right? So anyway, but again, there were these shifts and whatnot, because there were plenty of us still around, and it just kept growing and growing and growing, right? So anyway, again, I've been translating this stuff this way, but it was the way I was introduced to it, right? Translating it for modern people, right? As a matter of fact, one of the approaches, not really approaches, I was going to form a group a bunch of years ago, and it was titled Ancient Warrior, Modern Man. And that was the whole crux, right? The whole pivot, right? Not to change anything. It was, what would these things, just anybody that's been through my Ninja no Hachimon program, right, knows that that's exactly what I did, right? If you have that worksheet on the left side, the traditional Ninja no Hachimon, recognizing that was the science and technology of the day. And then the middle column specifies the principles and concepts, very summarized, right? In a nutshell, here's what it's all about. And then the right column is, what would that look like in today's world? Right? Not Well, that's ancient. So in today's world, we're going to throw these things together. People can do whatever they want. And they can call it whatever they want. Not going to argue with them, right? The universe knows right and wrong and contradictions and all that. So anyway, my goal has always been to help modern warrior protectors who, here's the other side, who want to apply this stuff to their lives, not just be martial hobbyists, not just be, uh, I don't know, fantasizing tough guys, whatever, right? But to actually be able to apply this. And that means every day. And like I said earlier, we're not in physical fights every day. However, having to deal with pushy salesmen, politicians gaslighting us, all kinds of shit, right? And being able to fight the urge to take sides or double checking information, all that kind of stuff, right? Being a smart warrior and not a useful idiot, not a warrior for the cause who they're just going to dispose of later. Because that's what these movements do. As soon as it clicks into place and they don't need dissidents, they don't need disruption, most people find themselves in jail, in fields working, or in graves. And I know every generation thinks that this one's going to be different because different people are running it. But humans and evil human motivations don't change. Okay? So, not my opinion. Centuries worth of proof. Anyway, the point being here is that in the coming weeks and months, you're probably going to start seeing this approach reflected more clearly, right? What I mean by that is I've always been teaching this way, but what's going to happen is you'll hear some new names and designations appearing, not replacements, but what I think are clearer labels for what we've been doing all along, right? So this isn't jumping ship. This isn't inventing my own thing or what. This is the same thing. We just need to make it easier for people to, as much as those of you in Mikyo, right? We talk about the hazards of the mind and consciousness creating name and form and then flucking everything up. The mind needs anchor points for clarity, things to aim for, right? The trick is in not getting stuck there, right? So again, these are not replacements. This is not like some of these folks that have just jumped ship and created their own thing and then justified that, right? What I want to do is I want to be more clear about, again, what we've been doing all along, right? And for those of you who have felt the same pull, right? How do I reconcile this ancient thing and I want to maintain the honor and tradition and whatnot, but at the same time this needs to be practical, right? Even if we're working on sword stuff and whatnot, still the lessons need to be practical for today's world, not necessarily the sword stuff, but what the sword is teaching, right? So for those who have felt the same pull, right, who sense there's something more waiting beyond the techniques, right? We will actually be very soon opening a path for instructors and senior students to help carry this mission forward. When I say senior students, I mean like people that have been around for a while, because I have somebody that just joined not too long ago and he's been in the martial arts for a long time. Hasn't been with me for a long time, but just absolutely wrapped around this. And I think I surprised him the other day when I said, "You ever thought about being a teacher?" Because like the biggest thing that this is doing for him, just like a lot of other people, is he sees that this is a lifestyle. This is not just like a passion or an interest that we're passionate about or whatever, right? That this is something that could with the risk of sounding woo-woo, change lives. It's done it for me. It's done it for lots of people. Right? But this has always been a path of transformation. So again, this isn't about leaving the Bujinkan. It's about living its heart. Okay. Hatsumi Sensei told us again and again that the Bujinkan is alive. Right? It is a living thing. Right? Living arts don't sit still. They evolve through understanding. So if you've ever struggled to balance the old and the new, faith and function, whatever, right? Consider this your invitation to be a part of the next. This may sound odd because words fail, right? But the next expression of the art, it's not like the next new big thing or whatever, right? But we'll call it a second ninja boom. How about that? Okay. So nothing that we've discussed tonight during this episode, right? Nothing changes the kata. Nothing changes the kamae or the kuden. Nothing. Nothing changes the principles and concepts. Right? Even if we were to develop anti-gravity boots, cars, whatever, those things don't change gravity. So even if, right? I mean, how many people have said that I don't do it like everybody else? Yeah. Well, there's a reason for that, and it's not because I have an oppositional, what is that? Oppositional defiant disorder. Okay. I'm going to do it differently because, like, not doing it. No. It's because if I was doing it wrong, I would not have ended up in the inner circle of several senior Japanese teachers. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So nothing we've discussed changes any of this. It only changes how we see them. Okay? And what we've been doing for a long time is seeing them as living templates for strategy, awareness, heart, life mastery, right? Protect that, and we protect the legacy, right? Because the art doesn't survive in scrolls or ranks. If it did, then the arts that Hatsumi Sensei and other people that I know that are literally defunct, right? They don't exist anymore. They have their scrolls, but those scrolls weren't passed to them. It wasn't a Menkyo Kaiden. It wasn't a transmission. They bought them in used bookstores in Japan. Okay. The scrolls were the thing that kept things alive. Then, it'd be like one of these fantasy movies. As soon as they touched them, the glow, right? So, but it doesn't survive in scrolls or ranks. It survives in people who understand. Okay? It survives in people like you. If this resonates. Right? We all know this. The ancient masters faced blades, arrows, and armies. In today's world, we face distraction, division, and deception. That doesn't mean that a thug can't break into our house or attack us on the street or whatever. But seriously, what are the dragons that we battle every day? Because there aren't bandits on the road all the time. There aren't armies storming or looking to move in and conquer the land that we live on. Are those possibilities? Yeah. But what are the probabilities? We need to start by solving probabilities. What's probably going to happen tomorrow? The next day. Right? Then we can deal with the possibilities. That's why for those of you going through the physical training under me, Mod 1, yeah, Ichimonji, Jumonji, Hira, Shizen, a couple of ground postures and whatnot, right? But not formal ones. I mean, they are. But Asuka and Kohen, people learn Seiza, but more as a mobility thing because you might be, sitting out with the family, having a picnic, or whatever. But it's not for the sake of those things. All the techniques taught in Mod 1 cover all of the statistically proven most common attacks that happen in the 95 to 98% of assaults that happen every day here in the West. Because if somebody's going to be physically attacked, that's probably what's going to happen. Yeah, but like, what if he has you from behind with his arm around your throat and he's got you bent backwards and he's got this pistol up against your your lower back, and he's already pulled the trigger once and blown a hole in your kidney, and now he's going to pull it again and blow your spine apart. Well, I don't know, fucking die. Right? You might want to use your last remaining seconds or whatever to ask yourself how the fuck you got there. But right, when are we going to do multiple attacker stuff? No, when you're going to be able to defend against somebody throwing anything they want, and you can use taijutsu and nothing else to defend yourself with. Okay? So that's what I mean about the difference between fantasy thinking, a dream that is disconnected from the real world, right? Because it only serves to get ego just salivating like a rabid dog, right? And a dream of having a certain type of life, having a certain type of confidence, control, power, those kind of things, where success is easier and right, this is the kind of life I want to live, right? And then I've got these other skills that can protect that from anything that might threaten it. Very different. Okay. So again, ancient masters faced very specific types of threats, right? In a highly regimented society. Western society, people don't like regimented things. They don't like rules. Don't tell me what to do, whatever, right? Shit, people don't even use basic friggin' etiquette for the most part anymore. If you come from my dojo and you live the lessons, it makes people's eyes open up like, holy shit. Well, nobody called me sir or ma'am in the last 47 years. Okay. But they face very specific things, right? We face our battlefield's very different. Our battlefield is keeping our sanity and keeping our heart intact so that we don't end up being disgruntled, depressed, anxiety laden people who are stuck in mediocre lives. That's fucked up. To me, that's worse than being run through with a sword. But the mission's the same. The mission's the same: to live courageously and consciously in an often dangerous world. Okay? So, let me just see if any other comments or questions popped up before I go and wrap this up. See, now I got to get rid of this little thing. Oh, there we go. Whew. All right. So let's see. Victor says, I think it would be difficult for me to let go of the Hatsumi Bujinkan organization. It is the fear of letting go and entering an undiscovered country. Yeah, me too. Right. I mean, this is my thing. But this is not about letting go of anything. Right. I think, again, my humble opinion, you and I've had conversations like this, that people have gotten so far away from what Hatsumi Sensei introduced to the world in the late 70s, early 80s. Principles, concepts, all that kind of stuff. That what I've been trying to do for a long time is to reunify the lessons so that we are actually working on all three aspects of a ninja. This is not different. This is living to the power and whatnot that he and Takuma Sensei. And Takuma Sensei said that this is not about fight skills, right? This is about surviving by tempering the spirit, right? That doesn't mean that we don't learn fight skills, right? So, but again, and you do you, right? We're all gonna, everybody's gonna do them. Okay. And Victor, you've been through some of my some of the pre and prep Mikyo programs, right? We always start with definitions. So, like when we think of defining anything, right? That Ninjutsu is a martial art. See, I've always contended that it's not a real martial art. It has martial aspects, but in the way most people think and engage with martial arts, where it's 80, 90% fighting and then philosophy and making yourself a better person and whatnot, are they're almost like side effects. This is just the opposite. uh, Um, the question is, how do you define any word, right? I get it, right? So letting go of the Hatsumi Bujinkan organization, I get it. But what does that mean to you? Define that thing, because that's where the attachment is. So I have no problem. Like if somebody were to want to talk about religion, right, and want to argue it or whatever, right? My first question is going to be define religion, okay? Because there's lots of ways to define it, but there's two basic ways, right? A dogmatic system of rules of conduct to engage with what? The world, right? In a very regimented kind of way, because like this denomination is different from that one and this religion is different, okay? Or is it a life philosophy that allows me to engage with uh, the world and life on levels that are not easily seen or touched or intellectually processed? They're more experiential. Those are two very different things. I don't care that you use the word. What I care about is knowing what you mean when you use it. Okay? So, anyway, Dave says, and we'll be battling AI. Not battling AI. Right? AI scares me enough as it is, but uh, luckily, right at the moment, I think AI uh, responds to not just prompts, but intent and direction. Okay? So somebody comes at it uh, from the perspective of trying to poke holes in something, or from a is there any what is the meaning of life is a very different prompt from what is the meaning of life for a human being. It's a very different prompt from what's the point of living a life where one feels like they're being shit on all the time, right? AI responds to each of those things very differently, right? And no amount of stopgaps that the creators are trying to put in now to make it less like it'll, if you ask it, how do I kill myself, right? Is there any point in going on? AI, and I've actually ferreted this out from ChatGPT, it's wired by default to be to answer in the positive and to motivate you along your lines of that you're already thinking, unless you specifically instruct it to tell you that you're full of shit when you're full of shit. Like if you're wrong, don't pacify it. I've done this. Don't treat me like I need to be patronized or placated or whatever. If I'm following a line, or if I want you to assess a specific understanding about a given teaching over here, or about this thing, or this research, or my understanding, don't treat things that are almost wrong or wrong in a way that makes me feel okay, or that makes me still believe that I'm right at some level, right? Like, here's where you're on. Here are some considerations for adapting your viewpoint. No. Right. So, but that's where a lot of these other people get themselves in major trouble. right? Because they don't understand that. And AI, one of the cool things, because it's that responsive, it becomes a mirror to, because most people don't realize that the way they ask something or present something, right? That speaks volumes about their intent, their inner workings, and all that. And like AI's, I don't know that it's like at this point in its evolution trying to fuck people up or get them to jump off buildings, but it's actually wired, it's actually programmed to, be the nice teacher that never tells you that you're wrong, but it's supposed to nurture you in a certain direction. So anyway, now if I'm wrong about that, well, then that's even more fucked up. But so anyway, do we know what we call AI in New York? AU. Wow. Yeah, but you're not New York. How do you do it in Florida? Right. Hey, what? Oh shit! You're gonna keep me informed if one of these fucking hurricanes get way too close to you, right? Or you're gonna migrate to New York for a couple of days until shit passes, right, Victor? And all you folks that are like, my wife and I were on a cruise and we outran. We had the ship; it was cooking to get us in between this friggin' hurricane that hooked off. If it would have, that Umberto, if it would have hit the eastern seaboard, that would have been a fucked up thing because it was Category 5. And at the last second, it freaking hooked off and went toward Bermuda. But there was this other tropical storm that was escalating in the Turks and Caicos and down around Cuba and all that kind of stuff. So we literally had to get past this pressure thing that was forming. But anyway, I have a generator. What is that? One of your cats on a bicycle? I have a generator. Okay, fair enough, right? And a deep basement, I hope. Anyway, all right, cool. So I'm not seeing anything else. So I hope Sensei Alexander is okay. Like I said, he was going for a stomach scan of his stomach to make sure that the pain and whatnot that he's experiencing was just kind of a stomach bug that's lingering and not something worse. So when I know and he gives me the okay for it, I'll let everybody know. But otherwise, hopefully next week I won't be flying solo again, and I'll have my producer back and won't have to be bouncing all over the place here. All right. So hopefully this was valuable. Watch for upcoming emails, and I've got I've got 8, 9 articles minimum that I need to get posted on the blog. So watch for those. You may get a couple of extra emails this week or whatever going, hey, new article up, hey, new art, whatever. Okay. It's all just an attempt to help folks learn more, get more, that kind of thing. And don't forget, this Wednesday at 3 p.m., we've got our weekly Whiteboard Wednesday. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, but it'll obviously fit some aspect of what we've talked about tonight. All right. All right. So until next time, right? Keep training, keep growing, and as always, protect the life you've chosen to build. With that said, I'll talk to everybody again next time. Be safe. Train hard.
Get more of KUDEN Radio, subscribe through your favorite podcasting site, or join our clan of serious modern warriors at onlineninjaacademy.com.